All right, so we've already looked at how to take your code, deploy it to Azure, and use Azure DevOps to do a build and release pipeline. So one other important part of a project is tracking what's worked on and tracking what is needed to be worked on. And so Azure DevOps provides the ability to do that very easily as well in the way of work items. And there's all kinds of different work items that we can put in here. And typically what you would do is the original BA or architect or analyst will go through and will create user stories that encompass the main functionality that's required, the main requirements that are needed for a system. And so we're going to create a user story for this. So the first thing we do is we just need to come up here and click on this little plus sign, and that will allow us to create a new work item. So we're going to pick new work item, and we're going to create a user story. So we'll click on user story, and it'll bring up a dialog that allows us to create a user story. Now the user story that we're going to create is going to build a simple test app to demonstrate Azure and Azure DevOps. Okay, we're going to assign this. We're going to leave this unassigned for now, and you can set the state. You can also set story points. You can set a risk assessment. You can give it a priority, and so we're just going to leave this defaulted like this.
How did we use story points for Project X?
So story points, in waterfall development, you would say, okay, this is going to take me 6 hours to do, and you would estimate everything by hours. In Agile development, you don't really do things by hours necessarily. You do things by story points, and so story points are just a way to estimate the development effort that a task is going to take. So you don't say this is going to take 3 hours. You're going to say this is one story point, and typically you do story points not in a linear fashion, but more in a logarithmic fashion. So 1, 2, 4, 8, 16 to kind of gauge the general size of that task. And so we'll make this one a 4. Now, what does a 4 mean? Well, a 4 means whatever you want it to mean inside of the project, right? It could mean 4 hours. It probably doesn't. But it means that it's 4 times bigger than a task that has a story point of 1. And so it's just kind of a way to estimate without really estimating exact time frames. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and save and close this guy. Now if we go into our boards and we go into our work items, you can see that we have that new user story that we just created. Now,
this is the product backlog.
So this is the product backlog, yeah, that's right. Now, typically you're not going to use your user stories as your work items that you actually work off of. You're going to create tasks underneath a user story that you're going to actually work from. So we're going to go into our user story again, and we're going to create a new task that's part of this user story. And we do that by going into the user story, and then over here in the related work section, we can add a link. And so we're going to add a new item, and we're going to make it a child of this user story. It's going to be a task, and we're going to call this change the title of the page to demonstrate release pipeline. So that's one of the tasks that we need to do to accomplish this user story. Okay. Now we're going to assign this to me, and then we're going to set the state to new, and we'll close that. Okay, so now this user story has a task underneath it. So if I go into the queries, I can set up a query to show all of my tasks, and it would show that. So I haven't set up any queries yet, so we'll just go back and look at work items again. And there's our task for setting up that title. Now, as we saw in the last video, we've already done this, right? And we've already committed the code. It's already been checked in. So when you're working with code in Visual Studio and using Azure DevOps, whenever you commit something, you have to give a comment to that commit. But above and beyond that, you can actually tie work items directly to a commit. So it's easy to go back and look at everything that was committed for a particular build, and not only see what the comments for that commit were, but see which actual work items were applicable to that commit. Okay, so you usually would do that in Visual Studio at the time you do the commit, but since nobody's perfect, people will forget, and there is a way to do it after the fact. So let's go see how we do that. So let's go find, well actually let's just bring up our task again. So we've already done this task. We've already completed it. We want to now link it to a commit.
Change the state.
Oh yeah, so the state is going to be closed because we're all done with it, but we want to add a link to a commit. So we click on Add Link in the Development section here rather than the Related Work section. We're going to do it in the Development section. And the link type is going to be a commit. So we want to link this work item to an actual commit. Now, if you know what the commit ID is, you can select it and paste it in here. Otherwise, you can go into here and you can find the commit, which is going to be this one, and you hit OK, and that will fill that in for you. So that's the SHA, or the commit ID for that commit. So then we're going to hit OK, and now you can see that that work item is tied to this commit. So what we can do now is we can go find that commit. First I need to save. Don't forget to save. We can go over into our commits area, and we can see all the commits that were done. This is the commit that we tied that to. So if we go look at this commit, we can see that we have one work item tied to this, and we can click on that, and it'll show the work item that we just linked to that commit.
Hey, Troy, how did we use in Project X these work items to document things like code reviews and design reviews?
Yeah, so let's go look at this work item, and we'll demonstrate that. So in the work item itself, there's a description area, which is usually used to give a little bit more detail on what the task is going to entail and what needs to be done. But we also have a discussion area, and this is where you can put anything you want about this task. So let's say that I had a design review, and we set up our own hashtag system. We had a hashtag design review, hashtag code review, hashtag whatever else you want to do. And that makes it easy to search for these kinds of things. So we had a hashtag design review, and I talked with Dave Merrill. So if you put an @ sign, you can actually link this to a specific person as well that's a member of the project. And then they'll get an email notifying them that they've been mentioned in a task, and then they can go look at it. And it keeps track of everything that not only you're doing with the hashtags, but who you're doing it with the @ signs. Talked with Dave Merrill about the best way to do this and figured it out. If I could type, it would be nice.
Figured the following out and document that.
Yeah, so you could put whatever you want in here, and once you save this, it creates that discussion item, and then you can do another discussion item later. So you can have as many discussion items as you want.
So Troy, what if you did some work on the whiteboard, or you have a separate document that is related to this code review or design review?
Yeah, so you can tie. So what you would do is you would take a picture, or you would write it up in a Word document, and then you can link those as attachments. So this little button right here is an attachment button. So let's say we did have a picture of the whiteboard, and we wanted to include that. You can come into here, and then you can add that as an attachment. And since it's attachments, it can be any file type. It can be anything you want. You can even do a 20 gigabyte VR video if you want to do that. So the other things that we have, so we saw the details. We also have this button here, which is history, and this will show everything that's happened in a timeline to this particular item. So you can see Troy Fillerup created it new, and then Troy Fillerup completed it and changed the status to closed. So you can see the history here of everything that happened, and there's just all kinds of information about the history of this particular item. This one will show you all the things that are linked to this work item. So we have a commit that's linked to it, and we have another work item, which is the user story, that is also linked to it. And so right here in the task, there is a plethora of information that you can get about exactly what happened, who was working on what. I mean, if I were to go and change the who it was assigned to, that would be in the history. And so you can see a full history of everything that was done and everybody who did it.
So Troy, can you talk about at some point how we handle bugs in Azure DevOps? When did we create bugs, and how did we associate bugs to these same stories?
Okay, so a bug, well, let's go ahead and save this.
That number,
Yeah.
it looks like that is unique across all of the.
So within our DevOps account, this number is unique. That's right. So it's 1184, even though this is really the second item I put into this project. This ID, this task ID, or this work item ID is unique throughout the entire account. So our account is writeuta.visualstudio.com. So even if we have multiple projects, this number is going to be unique throughout all the different projects.
Does that mean we had more than 1,000 work items?
We had more than 1,000 work
Project
items.
X?
Yeah, crazy, huh? And most of them were not bugs, I hope, but I don't know. So we're going to save this, and let's say somebody does find a bug. I know that's very rare and almost never happens, but if somebody does find a bug, it's really easy to add too. You just click add, and then you do bug. Now the reason that this shows up here instead of in here is because we've pinned bug to this menu. We could go ahead and pin task to that too, and now that one will show up in there. So just kind of whatever. I mean, epics, features, those aren't used very much, at least for us. And then user stories are really used more at the beginning of the project. You don't really use them. Once you get all the user stories done, there's not a lot more user stories added. I mean, there can be, but. So if you want to do a bug, all you do is instead of picking task, you pick bug. And then it gives you the same UI. This thing doesn't work. That's a bug. And then you would assign that. Now, since you usually assign it to the person who caused the bug, so it certainly wouldn't be me. We're going to go ahead and assign it to Dave. Sorry, Dave. And then it has all the same things that your task did. So you can link development items to it. You can link other work items to it. So what you may want to do actually is link an existing task to this bug. So this bug applies to this task, which is the one that we did. We can't do that because it already has a child, so we won't worry about that one. But I mean, you can add it to other tasks and whatnot. We're not going to do that right here, and you can add it to build to a commit as well. So we're going to go ahead and put that in there, and there's our bug. Okay. So if we go back and look at work items, you can see that we have all of our new work items. The other one we completed, and so it's not going to show up in the work items. We can go look at our backlog, and that's going to show all of our user stories. We can go into our user story, and here's the task that we had assigned to that. Now, if we had some sprints set up, we could go into our sprint, and we can have a Kanban board that will show us the workflow that our tasks are going through. Here's our this is our board, and so this is our Kanban board. This is what I wanted to show. And you can do this based on sprint. Right now, since we don't have any sprint set up, it's just going to show all the work items that we have. And then we can move these. So we're going to move this one over to active, so you can drag them and drop them between the different states, and it kind of shows you what you're working on. And you can even filter it by user. We can do a whole another video on how to use the Kanban board in Azure DevOps. But so right now, so we've already seen how to tie an existing commit to an existing task, right? So if you commit some code and you forgot to tie the work item to it, you can go into Azure DevOps like we just demonstrated and tie the work item to it after the fact. You can also, we don't want 2019. You can also do the that association right when you commit the code the first time. And let's see how we do that. So we're going to create, actually, we're going to create another task, another new task. So we're going to do a new task. And we're going to have this be change the title again. We'll assign it to Troy. And we'll assign it to that that user story, which I think was 1183.
It showed up right.
It's this one right here. So we'll tie it to that user story, and so now we have our new task. So we're going to save and close that, and that was.
And it put it in iteration 1.
Oh, it did. Oh, good. So let's go look at that. That one was ID 1187. So you do need to know the ID of the work item that you're going to be doing it, tying to it, so make sure you have that information. So let's go into Visual Studio then, and we're going to open up Project Y Web, which is what we were working with yesterday. See if we can get this up. Okay, now it's giving me an authorization error, so I need to go in and re-enter my credentials. Now, the way that you connect, so you'll notice that we can go in and we can check stuff in to the repo. We can commit stuff to the repo right now. But unless you're logged in with credentials that allow you into the Azure DevOps, you can't tie work items. So we need to make sure that we can do that. So the way that we do that is we'll click on this Manage Connections, and we want to go into the Project Y project. So we'll double click on that. And it's not letting me do it. Let's go to Manage Connections. Okay, so right now it's connected to the Azure commercial. So we're going to switch over to our other Microsoft account. And we're going to go into Write UTA, and we're going to go to Project Y, and we're going to connect to Project Y. Okay. Now you'll notice we have a lot more buttons here now than we had before, because now we have the full capabilities of Azure DevOps, not just the capabilities that the Git repo provides. Okay. So let's go in and look at our changes. Actually, let's make another change. Welcome to the
Super new slot.
Super app. Let's do that. Okay, whatever. Now you'll notice here in our changes pane of our Team Explorer, we now have a related work items section. And all we need to do is we need to click the plus sign here, and we need to enter in the ID of that work item, which I forgot already. It's 1187. So we're going to come in here, we're going to say 1187, and then you have to hit enter. Don't forget to hit enter or click on the add button, because if you don't, then it won't link it. But now we see that finds the work item. You can see the title, make sure it's the right one, and now this work item will be tied to this commit when we put it in there. So we'll give another comment, change the title to a new one. And then when we hit commit all and sync, it'll ask us if we want to save, which we do. And the commit is successful. Let's go back and look at our new task. So we'll go into here, and you'll notice if we refresh this that we now have a link to the commit that we just created. And we can go into here and we can click on this, which will take us to the commit, and we can see the actual changes that were made to that code, and everything is right here. So we can also go back. Let's go back and look at that work item again. And if we look at the history, okay, you can see that we have a commit that's in the history. So we can tell that we did a commit, and that that's the comment for that commit. So everything is very tightly tied together. Now we're done with this one. We'll come in here, we'll set it to closed because we're all done, and then you can see the history updated with that as well. Okay.
So
Now,
let's check the builds and
so we haven't done a build with it yet. So if we want to, so now if we go into our pipelines, so we have a build pipeline for this, right? And let's go into our build pipeline here. So it's currently waiting. So it did kick off our build automatically, but we have one job ahead of this one. So since we're using our self-hosted pool, I've got another build for Project X going on, and it can only do one thing at a time. So that's why this one hasn't kicked off yet. But we did kick off a build, so you can see that this is the build for today. It's January 11th. It's the first build for today. And we can go into the summary here, and it will show all the associated changes. So this is the commits that are tied to this build, and these are the work items that are linked to this build. And so everything is in here. So when it comes time for TCCB, when somebody asks you, well, what's part of this build, you go in here and say, well, here it is. This is what's the part of the build. And you can do that from the release as well. So if we go look at one of the releases that we did yesterday, we can go into the release, and we can look at this stage only, and it will show us the associated changes that were part of that.
So Troy, you're telling me that as part of the TCCB, I could use this to show down to the code level what changes were made and included as part of the build and the release?
That's exactly correct, yes. You can do that. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, how can POB factor into this? Because the reality is that POB is not going away. So what you would do is you can create a POB for the release, and all you would need to do is put this URL into that POB, and that will take you right to here, which would show you everything you could possibly want to know about that build. And you can even go into here and you can say, well, you can view all deployments, and it'll show you everything that was ever deployed to that stage.
It's almost too good to be true.
It's almost too good to be true. That's right.
We'll be out of jobs.
Yeah. So it really streamlines the process, because essentially what you're doing is you're documenting the entire development process as you're doing it, right? So you're not waiting to the end to say what you did. You're every step of the way, if you're disciplined and you do the things that you're supposed to do, by the time you're ready to deploy, the documentation is all done and you're ready to go.
Well, and if I remember from yesterday's video, with the gated deployment features, you can truly set it up so that you've got gatekeepers, even multiple gatekeepers, that can go and make sure that the documentation is there and is sufficient before allowing the release to go into production.
That's exactly right. And what you can also do too, if you wanted to, you can come into here, and you'll notice I went into commits. We can go ahead and we can pick a different release. So we've only got the 2 releases that were successful to this stage, but we can go and pick, let's see, we can go, okay, yeah. So we can go and pick what changed since release 1. So it'll by default show you what changed since the last successful release. But let's say we want to see what all has changed since the first time we released this. So we pick release 1, we click OK, and now it shows every commit that happened from release 1 to this release. So you have even more rich history if you want to go back that far. And it would be really easy to see that. Now work items, you can do the same thing. Since we only have one work item in here, it's not going to show much, but you can actually go back and look at what has changed since any specific release. Now, in Project X, sometimes what happens is you publish something up to the web, and how do you know that what's in the web is actually what was in the build? And so you'll notice that we have these build numbers. So this is a build number, 2019-0110.8. That was the build number. That's what actually got built into this release. So if we go look at the web page, though, there's no way to tell on the web page that release is the one that's running in the web, right? So in Project X, in our build pipeline, we added another step that will take a token in our code and replace it with the build number. Okay, so what that allows us to do now, if we go look at Project X, for instance, then you'll notice up here that we have a build number. And the build number is 2018.12.19.1. So that is the number of the build that is currently running in production. And so it's really easy by doing that to see what's running in production. And the way that we do that, I can just show that really quick. So let's go look at Project X just for fun. And I'll show just a little bit of the build pipeline that allows us to do that. So if we go into our build pipelines, and this is the build that does all of our web projects. So if we go look at this, and we're going to edit this build, so you can see that this one is a little bit more complex than the one that we did for Project Y, because there's a lot more. So we have all these different microservices, and we want to build them all at once and take care of all of them at once. So right here we have this replace tokens task, and what that does is that allows us to, in this path, so our nav menu, we have an HTML file called navmenu.component.html. In that HTML in our project, we have a piece of text that says underscore underscore vernum underscore underscore. So if we look in advanced, this is our regex that we use. So underscore underscore some word underscore underscore. It's going to replace that with whatever we tell it to replace it with. Okay. So the way that we do that is we go into our variables and we see vernum. So in our code, that variable is called vernum, and it's going to replace vernum with the build.build number. So it does that right before the build, then it does the build, and that's what allows us to have the build number that's actually running in the site displayed up here. So that's a way to make sure that what you say you've published, you actually have published. So anyway, that's just kind of a side note, something that I thought was kind of fun. So, are there any other questions from the audience? No? Okay. Well, that's the end of this video. The next video is going to go in a little more detail of some more Azure stuff. So.